So, kind of reframing this, what can authors do as far as like when it comes to getting themselves out there, expectations, you know, there's plenty of people that'll offer marketing. Honestly, I don't even bother marketing with the people that like this show is dedicated to because most of them can't afford my services. Like it would be literally ripping them off because I know, like you said, how many books they're actually going to sell and what it's going to cost for me to even collect the data to try and sell more books than that. It's just non-economical. But for a small publisher or a self-publishing entity, there are ways that they can help get their books out there that can make meaningful change. You know, I always just tell people marketing is relationship building at scale. You, I think, take it a little bit more to like it's just relationship building, direct relationship building, and be happy with that. But elaborate a little bit more on it.
Well, the first thing I tell everybody who wants to write a book is get your book manuscript edited because it has to read well for anybody to be interested in it. There's so many books to choose from that if the first page, the first chapter, the first sentence don't grab people, they're just going to put it down. So if you want to put the work into writing a book, I urge everyone to have it edited professionally by 2 or 3 developmental editors so that it really sings and shines and so that you can be proud of it and proud of what you're selling. Beyond that, then authors have to decide how they want to publish. And the traditional route is to get an agent who pitches to publishers and you get an advance and the book comes out. And that still happens. That still happens for a couple 100,000 people a year, which is maybe 10% of books are published on the 20th century model still. And if you want to go that route, feel free. But it could take you a year or longer to find an agent who would represent you. It could take that agent a year or longer to find a publisher to publish it if they find one at all. Time is money. If you want to go that route, you're going to be spending a whole lot of time. The other route is to do some form of self-publishing. And self-publishing doesn't mean that the author arranges everything. In fact, most self-publishers hire companies that print books, publish books. These are called hybrid publishers or pay to play, pay to print. And you pay them, and they know all about book formatting. Some of them even edit. They can get you an ISBN. They can do all of the technical stuff that would require a significant learning curve for someone just jumping in and wanting to do it. And so those companies charge anywhere from about $5,000 to $20,000 to release a book. And you can decide to pay that or not. If you want to do everything yourself, you can, and it'll still cost you several $1,000s to bring a book out, especially if you're paying editors to read it. But there's all kinds of choices that authors can make depending on their own financial circumstances and their artistic vision and how they want to proceed with their work. So there's no longer any right way to publish. There's just the way that works for who's ever doing it and whoever that author is. And so I encourage authors to get a broad overview of what's available and possible and then make their best decision based on their own circumstances.
For me, the death knell on trad pub was I had a previous guest on the show. She was a young black woman, and her feedback from the when she was out getting published, and I was floored at this, was that when her fantasy, young adult fantasy novel, they didn't feel enough of her black experience was in the book to bother with it.
Well,
And I'm
that's
like,
yeah.
to say, okay, I don't know, I've lost the plot on all this. Like,
Yes.
clearly they're doing something I'm not aware.
A lot of black writers have had that experience of publishers saying this book isn't black enough. And in fact, there's a wonderful novel called American Fiction that was a movie last year about this very phenomenon of black writers feeling that they can't win for losing. If you write something that's too black, the publishers reject it because white people buy it. And if you write something that's not black enough, publishers reject it because they say you're not black enough. So it all comes down to the author and the art. If you're an author and you have something to say, you just want to write something, you want to tell a story, I say, tell it. Tell your story and make sure you tell it the best way you can, get it edited so it shines, and then make decisions about how you're going to publish it.
Hmm. It was one of those decisions: start an email list early and focus on that being a major vector of your success.
Absolutely. There's a tremendous emphasis these days on having a quote unquote robust social media presence, as if posting on Instagram and Facebook is going to sell your book. It doesn't. Um, the research is very clear that main thing, the main reason that people buy books is that someone they know recommended it to them. I mean, I'm a voracious reader. Almost never buy books based on some, random post on Instagram. When I buy books, it's because a friend of mine said, Mike, I just read this book and I think you would really love this book. Authors to crawl out of their holes. Being an author is kind of a solitary enterprise. And so it often attracts loners who like solitude. And I like solitude and I love to write by myself in a little room. But if you want to sell your work and you want to get to a market, you have to be friends with a lot of people and have a big circle of acquaintance and a big email list, and then appeal to them directly to buy your book. Who's going to care about your book when there's 2 million books out there? Well, chances are it's going to be the people who know you over random souls on social media. So I encourage people to develop broad circles of acquaintanceship, big email lists, and then email your list and do it several times.
Well, one of the things I always point out with authors, just because it gets overlooked so much, and I know it's, to me, it's why there is so much dreck out there, is that authors like to focus on story. But the bottom line is like there's only so many stories to tell. It's the age old adage, like there's only so many stories to tell, and you really get it down to there's really only one story to tell, and you can dress it up however you like. I feel it's like super important to focus on the things that separate you. Number one, your author's story, whether or not you want to be a celebrity of any kind. The bottom line is that can be something that separates you immediately with the reader from the other types of, I don't know, the other books about trolls and dwarves and whatever they're reading. Like it's very difficult to do that. The other thing is focusing, like anytime you're doing marketing, like focusing on the protagonist and how the reader can see themselves in the protagonist. I feel like it gets glossed over so much who's actually in this story in an effort to gloat about this wonderful world building that you did and this, look, Tolkien already did that. It was amazing. We love it. And it's, like you said, never going away. It's always going to be in the stores if people want glorious world building. But if there's a way to directly interface in a way that's unique to me, I like the idea of focusing on niches when it comes to this stuff. Like find ways. I tell people, I don't care what, if you're in an industry of like auto mechanics, go out and start talking to other auto mechanics because there's probably other things that you like together in common. Just a good place to start as opposed to just throwing a wide net and hoping God you catch everybody.
I totally agree with you. I agree. The only thing that I would quibble with is that not every story has been told. Everyone has their own. I mean, so if you talk about the American experience is the story of immigrants. Everyone's an immigrant. And every immigration story is sort of the same. But every immigration story is unique to the people who experienced it and the group they're in and the times that they immigrated to this country. And,
I was going to say there's only one Scarface.
yeah, my grandparents immigrated to this country in the early 20th century and they had lots of stories to tell. Well, immigrants who are coming into this country today have much different stories to tell. And I think everyone has stories that they can tell. And if you're going to write memoir, do it. If you're going to write fantasy fiction, fine. If you're going to write, like I did, I wrote Untold Story of Books as a history. whatever floats your boat. If you're a writer, you have the freedom to write about anything you want. It doesn't mean you're going to get rich and famous, but it does mean that you can write whatever you want to write. And I say more power to you.
Now, I'm just ask this question. You can gloss over it if you want. Uh, how do your actual books outside of this sell, or is this like something where people attack you and saying this is just sour grapes because your books don't sell and nobody likes you or anything like that? I don't get the impression that that's the case. I feel like it's more like you're hearing the complaints of the people around you and trying to explain it for them.
My goal in publishing the untold story of books was to tell authors and aspiring authors and people who love books what's really happening in the book business today. And, I don't judge it. I mean, there's 2 million books published this year. How do I feel about that? Well, I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, lots of people get published. On the other hand, there's so many people are reading all those books that they're not going to read mine.
You have said you have 18 books that you've published outside of this one. Is that correct? I
Yeah,
hear.
this is my 19th book, right?
What do you normally publish in? Out of curiosity.
Well, I made my career writing about health and sexuality. And so all consumer health books is what I generally wrote. And I had a specialty in alternative medicine. And I had a big hit with a book about herbal medicine, a folklore meets science guide to medicinal herbs that talked about the traditional uses of 135 medicinal herbs and then looked at the research as to what they actually do.
I have a feeling many of my readers would be interested in that one, just to be clear.
Yeah, that book is called The Healing Herbs, and it took off like a rocket. I mean, that book sold 1 million copies, and it came out in 1981. So it's been in 4 editions. This book has been a huge success.
So the moral is no sour grapes here.
No, no, I have no sour grapes. That book put my kids through college. I also wrote a mystery series for a while, 4 books in a mystery series, and those books hardly sold at all. The worst selling book of my mystery series sold 300 copies, and my best selling book in the mystery series sold about 2,500. So, it's perfectly possible for an author to have one book that sells 300 copies and another book that sells 1 million copies. There's just no knowing what's going to strike a chord with the public. And all that you can do is practice your craft, practice your art, hope for the best, and try and market and promote and do the best you can.
Michael, I want to thank you so much for coming on today. This has been, I don't think it's been necessarily anything a lot of people didn't know, or like definitely at least feel in their heart of hearts, but the way you put it together and talk about it, I feel is important for people to like take it on the chin and like grapple with the reality of how this is.
Well, thanks so much for having me on, Nick.
Where can we send people to pick up a copy?
Amazon and bookshop.org have The Untold Story of Books, and it can be ordered through any bookseller in the United States. So check it out and look at the Amazon page. Lots of people really like this book, and I'm really glad they do.
Well, thank you once again.
Thanks. Thanks for having me on.